Okay, I think we're all here now. It's kind of difficult because we can't see anybody, but I think you're all there. Hi, my name's Alison. I'm the MD at Bunnyfoot. Thank you all so much for joining the talk on journey maps and UX models that we're going to be delivering today. As you can see, we've got a lot of people here. We had over 530 people registered from 230 companies. So thank you very much. I can see you're all saying hi. That makes me feel less alone. So thank you. We're not speaking into the void. So that's great. For those of you who don't know anything about Bunnyfoot, just a little bit of background information. We've been going for 25 years now. Amy and I haven't been here for that long, although I'm not that far off, but we're a team of specialist consultants and practitioners, a whole range of specialisms there. We've got UX strategists and researchers, designers, accessibility people, all of that sort of thing. We're UK based in London and Sheffield, but we do a lot of international work as well. And we do a whole range of services that you can see there, including training, participant recruitment, and research lab build and hire, as well as the services that I mentioned before. We are part of a bigger group, so we're part of the Sideshow group. It's a group of 10 agencies that deliver across the whole digital range, so including things like SEO, paid search, branding, conversion rate optimization, data science, delivery, the whole range. And it's you can work with agencies individually or a selection of the ones that you need in order to meet your requirements. So have a look at Sideshow if you want to know any more about that. And now I'm going to introduce Amy, our wonderful lead consultant, who is an expert in all things UX, but specifically here, she's going to be looking at maps and models. So over to you, Amy.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Ali. So Ali will be joining us again at the end of the session today for the Q&A. But as she mentioned, my name's Amy. I look after the team of consultants here at Bunnyfoot, but also very much hands-on in leading and delivering projects, from short tactical pieces right through to large strategic service design pieces as well. I actually originally started out in print design, and over the years I've moved into digital user experience and service design. But really at the heart, I've always been passionate about understanding people and their needs, and also businesses and their needs, and then creating solutions that meet the needs of both parties in a sustainable way. I have the pleasure of working with a huge variety of clients at Bunnyfoot. I've put just a few of them on this slide to give you a flavour. And I also teach on some of our training courses, develop different services that we offer as well. So involved in all sorts of different things in my day-to-day, but just a bit of an overview of the kinds of things that I get up to. A few things just to mention as we get started today. As I said, at the end of the webinar, we will leave some time for some Q&A. So please do add any questions that you've got in the Q&A box that you will see in the platform. Please don't put the questions in the chat. Obviously, welcome to add any comments and things in there, but we might not spot your question if you put it there. So please add it in that Q&A tab. If you spot a question that you particularly like, you can also upvote it in there as well. So some of the ones that are most popular, we will try and answer at the end as well. We always get asked when we do webinars if people are able to have the recording afterwards. We will be sending that out. Joe will be back in touch with the recording of the webinar, so don't worry about that. And also today, we just wanted to mention before we get going that we have got an opportunity that I'll share a bit more about at the end of today's webinar, where we're going to be offering a limited number of free follow-up consultations about journey mapping to support you in applying what we're talking about today. So as I said, I'll share a link and a bit more information about that at the end, but just to let you know that that is coming later. So let's get started. Today, I'm going to be covering what actually is user experience mapping and modelling, why should we use it, and then I'm going to be showing you a range of different ways that these techniques can be applied to help you to identify, if you're not currently, how you can use these methods in your organisation, and if you have already started to use these things, how maybe you could build on those and improve things there. So very first question that we need to cover off is, what actually are maps and models? Well, a model is a simplified description or representation of something. So it could be things like personas, it could be mental concept models, all of those kinds of things are in that category. And a map then is also a type of model. It's essentially a graphical representation of a procedure, a process, a structure, a system, something that shows the arrangement of and the relationships between different components. And a map can look like lots of different things. I've got a few different examples of the types of maps that you might create. So on the left here, starting from that left-hand side, we've got a chronological map. Might be a journey map, for example, where you're looking at interactions with something over a period of time. It might be a hierarchical map, like a mental concept model or an IA, for example. It could also be a network map, such as a service ecosystem map, where you're looking at the relationship between different people within the provision of a service. It could also be spatial, so a geographical map, which shows physical spaces and how people can interact with those. So lots of different types of maps. We use all sorts of different ones. I've just gathered a few examples on here to show you. And essentially these look at what individuals do, what they think about and how they feel in a particular context. And by using these, it means that we can plot experiences, actions, expectations, people's thought processes, people's emotions, or to be honest, anything that is going to be useful to the project and to the particular challenge that we're exploring, all in one place. And they enable us to identify opportunities for improvement. They enable us to highlight areas that we can innovate, be that on within a product, within a website, within a service, even a physical space. So that is why we use them. And I've shown you a selection of them here. I'll talk you through some of these in a little bit more detail in a moment, but we will pick the maps and models that we use depending on the needs of the project and depending also the stage of the project that we're at as well, because they can be applied even in different stages throughout the life cycle of a project as well. So as I say, I'll give you a quick overview of these, and then I'll talk you through how we've actually used some of them in practice. It may be that some of you today joining the webinar are quite familiar with some of these maps and models, so I'm not going to go into them in loads and loads of detail, but it is a really good place for us to start to make sure we're all sort of on the same page with our understanding, particularly for people who are a bit less familiar maybe with some of these techniques. So Bunnyfoot, as Ali mentioned earlier, we are all about evidence-driven design. And conducting research with your users is at the heart of a user-centered approach. You need to be able to understand the needs of your users to then inform and validate your design decisions. We can't do design or effective and good design without doing our research in the first place. So if research is all about obtaining the right evidence in the most effective way, design then is all about applying that evidence to improve the user experience. And when we think a bit about mapping and modelling, we will often talk about it as being the bridge that connects the research stage to the design stage, because it's really effective at facilitating team alignment, at communicating needs. So these maps and models are really visual, they're easy to share, and they pack a lot of information into one place, which means that teams can then align on some of the opportunities that they highlight, and they can then use those actionable insights to take into the design phase to make sure that the research and design phases are firmly connected. There's no point, as many of us know, there's no point doing research if it just sits somewhere, it's not actionable, it's not ever looked at again. It was a lovely research project that somebody did a while ago, but it doesn't have any real impact on the actual design. So that's where mapping and modelling can really help us. I love this quote. This is from UX researcher Indy Young, who many of you will know of. And they once wrote, "When I first met a team, I asked them, what benefit will this project have for your users?" And they get answers such as, "It will increase our customer satisfaction scores," or "It will allow us to publish more XXX." Evidently, lots of people still have a hard time articulating the customer's perspective. I think those of us that work in the field of user-centered design, we are so familiar with putting the end user at the center of our thinking, but often organizations need a bit of help with that. So maybe people within your organization that you're here representing today need some help with that. And UX maps and models can be really useful for helping people to see things from that point of view of their users, and then to put that perspective right at the center of the design process to make sure that the websites, the apps, the services, whatever it is that we're designing, are both useful and usable. And it's not just being based on assumption, it's being based on evidence. One of the methods that we will often use to help organizations in moving their thinking in this direction is something called empathy mapping. And typically we'll use this in stakeholder workshops just to get people to start to think from the perspective of a persona or a user type. So we'll think about something that they're trying to do, and then we'll think about, right, what are they seeing at this point in time? What are they hearing from other places? What background noise is going on? What influences are there on them? And then we think about their emotions, their thoughts, their frustrations, their motivations, and starting to capture some of this stuff and starting to articulate it really helps to get teams into the mindset of their users. And it's also really, really helpful in a workshop situation, particularly at the beginning of a project prior to doing research, because you are able to kind of get out all of this insight and assumption from stakeholders about their users, which you can then use to help form useful research questions to actually find out, is that true? Does that actually align with what we can see in the research? So these are a really useful workshop tool, and I would say particularly useful if you're facing that problem of how do I get people to start thinking from the perspective of the user and really recognize that they are not the user. Another modeling tool that we use to focus in on the user's point of view is personas. Now, people sometimes get a bit confused about what personas are, but really, I think it comes down to the difference between demographics and behavior. So I've got a bit of a challenge for you. I want you to have a think. Somebody who would fulfill all of these different characteristics. They're white, they've got blonde hair, they're American, born in 1946, they have several multi-million-dollar business ventures, they're a bit of a media personality, they've created a foundation in their name, in Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in 2021, and they've got a net worth of over $500 million. Can anybody take a guess about who we might be talking about? Feel free to pop something in the chat quickly. Oh, I can see somebody saying Donald Trump. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay, some good guesses. So it could be Donald Trump. It could also be Dolly Parton, right? These both fall into the demographic list that we've got shown here, but I would hazard a guess that their behaviours are probably quite different from each other. And personas, when we're talking about them, they're based on behaviours, okay? Because it's people's behaviours, it's their goals, it's the tasks that they need to perform and how and why they want to do those things that we can actually design to. And we should be really careful not to confuse personas with marketing segments, because they're typically based on generalized demographics of a target market. Of course, you can have behaviors that will span multiple market segments. You can also have single segments that will exhibit multiple behaviors. But when we're talking about personas, we're talking about behaviors, not demographics. And what's really important with personas as well is once you create them, again, don't just leave them to sit on a shelf. They need to be something that you're referring back to constantly throughout the design process to kind of make sure that what you're designing is meeting your persona's goals and motivations and behaviors. So how do you actually create personas is a question that we will be asked a lot. When we start new projects, we'll often work with clients to identify who are your important categories of user. Sometimes those are based on job roles. Sometimes they're based on user goals as well. So for example, projects I've worked on where it's been based on roles, it might be a university website where the roles are things like students, academic staff, outside organisations, equally something like a children's hospice, where we did a piece for them. It might be parents, it might be donors, it might be supporters, nurses, etc. So those are sort of based on roles related to the organisation. But there can be other ways of categorising based upon goals. So for example, for a TV streaming service, The goals might be around users who know exactly what they want to watch, and so therefore they just coming onto the platform and trying to get to that show as quickly as they can, versus people who are just looking to browse around and looking for a bit of inspiration. So different ways of categorizing users. But once we've actually gone through that process of identifying and categorizing, we'll get them to prioritize some of those customer categories, and we'll then ask them to start to identify goals, tasks, needs, pain points that they think that each of these customer groups have. And again, that enables us to kind of draw out those assumptions from the stakeholders for us to then confirm or refute through the research. And it's only once we've done the research that we can then create personas. I can't tell you the number of times that we've come across personas that have been created without any research being done. And actually, those are quite dangerous because you're basing whole design decisions off of no evidence. So we would only ever create personas based off of research. You can create something called pen portraits, which I'll show you an example of later, which are about assumptions and existing knowledge, which you then would build upon using research. But yeah, there needs to be the research underpinning them. So these are just one way to present the key needs of a user type. They're presented as if it's a person. So they're easy to identify with, they're easy to talk about, but they're not based on one single person, right? They're an archetype of a group of customers with shared behaviours. And so they'll often have the following elements within them. They have a bit of background information, which helps to kind of bring them to life, talks about their goals, talks about the things that they're trying to do in the context of their particular life situation. And also a quote that sums up maybe a behavioural characteristic, something that you can kind of read at a glance, and it helps to remind you about this particular persona and who they are. You'd obviously cover goals, tasks, and needs, so the things that they're trying to do and what they need to accomplish to achieve those tasks, their pain points, their anxieties, anything that has a sort of negative impact on them and their ability to achieve what they need to. And also dimensions. You can see the bottom right here, we have these little behavior spectrums, which are consistent across the suite of personas that we might create, but they show where each persona sits there. So for example, here we've got time poor versus time rich. In this case, this particular persona is more on the time rich side, but we would have other personas that would cover off the other extremes of those dimensions as well. It's really important when you're creating personas to keep them concise, particularly around demographic information, keeping that to a minimum, sometimes not really needing to include much demographic information at all. So essentially only what is relevant to the goals, only what's relevant to the thing that you're designing. So for example, don't tell me that they live in a semi-detached house if it's of no real relevance to the product or the service that they're using, and it's not going to be helpful to any designer. Of course, there might be scenarios where you're designing something that is useful information. Maybe you're looking at a service installing EV charging points. That would be potentially helpful information, but for something else, it might not be. So only include relevant information. And I think if you put too much demographic type information in without context and without relevance, it can lead to people making assumptions and just sort of stereotyping about these people. So keep it really specific. Also keep it specific to the thing that your team are designing. Sometimes we will see personas that are far too general to be of any real use to a design team because they don't really say anything about how a persona is approaching the particular goals that you're considering in that area. So then once you've got your understanding of your users and your personas, the other maps and models that you create will be from the perspective of one of those personas, or at the very least a user type if you've not yet got to the point of creating personas. So let's have a look at some other UX maps and models that we use. User journey maps, first of all. These are sometimes called customer journey maps, depending on the journey that you're describing. And they essentially provide a visualization of how a user group or a persona experiences a product or service. They focus on a particular situation, particular journey. They're time-based, so they're chronological, and they bring the persona to life by showing that journey through time. You can use them to map across multiple channels. It can be digital, non-digital, mixture of both. And what they're really great at is for highlighting the highs and lows of an experience, which means that you can then kind of at a glance go, right, there is an area for improvement. That's a particular trough in the experience. And this is a particular area that we could innovate on. What you include in a journey map will really vary depending on what's useful for your project. But let me just talk you through a few of the common components that we would often include in these types of maps. So as I've said, they would always focus on a particular user group or persona. So it's helpful to note the perspective that they're coming from. So that's really clear. You would note the journey or the part of the journey that the map is focusing on, the stages of the journey, and then the steps or the actions that the user's taking within those stages. Anything that the persona is thinking about. So what questions do they have? What opinions and expectations have they got along the way relating to each of those different steps as they go along? And then we also capture the emotions. So we'll often draw this as a line, an experience line, where you can show really visually the peaks and troughs of that experience as they go through. And then an opportunity is kind of swim lane, as we call it at the bottom, where as we're going through mapping these things, we will often identify opportunities, and it's helpful to note them within this map rather than them sort of being lost in somebody's thoughts somewhere. So keeping them aligned to the different things that you've highlighted on your map is really useful. You can obviously fit in loads of information to a single journey map, but beware, because I sometimes see journey maps that are just too difficult to read. They've got too many lanes, they've got too much shown on them. They're trying to cover multiple personas in one map. It's much better to focus on one perspective with any one map. And if you've got another persona that you want to look at the same journey for, then create it as another map and kind of look at them side by side. It's much easier to read. And again, consider relevance. Don't be telling me what they had for breakfast if that's not going to be relevant to the thing that we're looking to design. There's obviously loads of different ways that you can gather research to inform journey maps, and I know many of you joining the webinar today work in user research, so you'll be familiar with some of these methods or all of these methods: depth interviews, usability testing, surveys, workshops, contextual inquiry, autoethnography, analytics, and more. So many different ways that you can inform journey maps. And we'll often conduct research that will inform personas as well as journey maps at the same time, because you can ask similar types of questions around some of the areas that I've listed on the right here. So you're really wanting to dig into what are their goals, what are their actions, what are the needs, the touch points that they're interacting with, the different devices that they're using, and not just the devices, but the contexts that they're in. Any anxieties that they have, frustrations, emotions, high points, low points, all of those are the things that you're going to be wanting to either ask questions about or be seeking to observe in people's behaviour. So there's loads of different ways that journey mapping can be applied. I'm going to talk to you about 3 different ways. So often we will map journeys that play out over quite a short span of time. It might be using a single channel, such as a customer finding and booking a holiday on a website. It might be them buying a product online. So they're just going through a single journey. Sometimes, though, we will map out journeys that play out over a longer period of time across multiple different channels. So that might be, not only them finding and booking that holiday, but actually the experience of going on that holiday and once they've returned, and all the different interactions that they might have with the company over that time. And then at the bottom here, we've got lifetime journeys. So sometimes we will map out whole lifetime journeys. So this is where we're thinking about, for example, the growing relationship between a charity and their supporters over a whole lifetime. They'll look at lots of different channels. They'll look at lots of smaller journeys within the overarching interaction with that charity. They may not necessarily be linear, but you're basically looking at ways that that journey is evolving over time and over a long span of time across lots of different areas. So lots of different ways that you can use journey mapping, however big or small the journey you're exploring is. We've used them in all sorts of different ways, from buying a football to travelling through airports and many more. Another way of investigating customer journeys is with something called a mental content model. And this is something that's really useful, particularly when you're trying to understand people's information needs and the sort of content that will service those needs. So typically we'll use these in information architecture projects, where we're helping clients understand what information needs to be surfaced where, within their website, within their food ordering kiosk, within their TV streaming platform, etc., etc. But for today, let's take the example of going to the theatre as a bit of an example customer journey. So they're thinking about, where am I going to go, what's on, right the way through to actually booking the ticket. And a mental content model would describe all the different questions and information needs that the user has as they're going through the different stages of this journey. And it maps the content to those needs. So what you can see here, this is just a small section of a much longer mental content model. But as with other journey maps, it focuses on one persona's point of view. So in this case, we've got Denise, and it's also focusing on a particular journey. So she's looking at booking a visit to the theatre. And then a mental content model has just got two swim lanes, if you like, the top and the bottom. So at the top, you've got the way that somebody thinks, their mental model. So as they're going through all of those different stages of the journey, what is it that they're thinking about? What is it that they're asking questions about along the way? And some of the key tasks, the key subtasks within those stages. And then the bottom, the second sort of swim lane, if you like, that describes all the content that would serve those information needs. That might be existing content that's on this theatre's website, or it might be content that could be newly created. So for example, here you can see one of the questions the user's got is anywhere theatre any better than other places that I could visit? And then you've got some of the content that's listed below that could help to answer that question, both directly, so for example, showing some of the USPs of the theatre, but also indirectly as well, showing information about the history, showing information about the values of the theatre. So it's really useful for seeing where there's content to support questions and where there's not. If we look at this really simplified sort of visual representation of a mental content model, you can really quickly see Tower 1 really well supported with lots of content. Tower 2 isn't. And so we can identify, right, here's an area where users have questions, have information needs that are not being serviced. How can we create content that will meet those needs and will give them the information they need to progress with their journey? So really, really useful tool, particularly when you're thinking about how to structure content and what content you need to introduce. Let's move on. We're going to talk about another mapping technique that we use, service blueprints. So service blueprints really zoom out. They cover all the different touch points and transitions within a particular persona's journey with a service. But they also cover not just the end user's journey, but also everyone that the end user interacts with along the way. And also, in addition to that, everything else that's happening behind the scenes to enable that service provision too. And why they're great, these service blueprints, is that they can help you to identify pain points and opportunities for improvement, not just in the end user journey, but in the provision of the whole service, right? So it enables you to highlight things like duplicated staff effort, for example, or parts where it's a bit clunky, the transition between maybe a part of the experience that one team looks after into the next part of the experience. So they're a really great way to get that holistic view across different, potentially siloed departments, different processes, different employees, and the way that the end user sort of journeys through all of those different things. Got a bit of a visual representation of this from De Krieger, which shows a physical interpretation of a service blueprint applied to a cafe. So in this front portion here, you've got the people sat at the tables, they're having their drinks, having their food, and then they cross over what's called the line of interaction. So this is where they go and actually speak to or have some sort of direct interaction with the onstage or front stage staff. So for example, here it might be to go and order another coffee, for example. And then we have this line of visibility, which is represented here by this wall at the back of the cafe. And this is where behind that, everything is hidden from the view of the customer who's in the cafe, right? So this is a little bit like the curtain, the back curtain in a theatre. Everything that happens behind that curtain is absolutely vital for the show to happen, but the audience never sees any of that. They're never exposed to any of what's happening off the stage. So you can see in this example, backstage, you've got the kitchen, you've got them preparing all of the food and drinks. And then beyond that, you've got the line of internal interaction. So that's all the things to do with support processes. In this case, things like ingredients being delivered, which the customer would never see or should never see, but it all supports the provision of them getting their coffee, them getting their sandwich in the cafe. So in a service blueprint, you map all these different parts of the process, all these different interactions. So hopefully you can see that they're really beneficial for understanding everything that's going on behind the scenes. And it's not just the human to human interactions, it can be human to technology interactions, things like how the staff member's interacting with a till, things like how the till is interacting with the printer, and all of the support processes in place to help that. I'll show you an example of one of these applied to a project a bit later on, but as an introduction, that is service blueprinting. So all the maps and models that we've talked about so far can be used to better understand the current user experience, the as-is states. But also we often use them to think about the future state, the ideal user journey, the to-be state. And they can be really useful to apply in workshops once you've got all your research, you've mapped out the current experience, you've highlighted where there's pain points, you've highlighted where there's opportunities for innovation. We can start to map out and design the potential for the future journey and what it could be, and start to play around with ideas for that based on the findings from the research. So I just wanted to share with you, before we get into the case studies, a few more modelling techniques that can be particularly useful for that stage where you're starting to think a bit about the future. Business origami is a really useful tool. It's a fun tool to use as well. It's very 3D, it's very visual. You can see here you have like little pieces of paper that are cut out and folded up, hence the origami name. And you get teams sat around a big table using these little things and representing different people, different buildings, different artifacts like digital products, all mapped out on this sort of table. And what I find really useful actually as a top tip with this is to line the table with paper, because you can then scribble notes onto it as you go, and capture bits of the conversation that people are having as you go along. And it's great because you can also, you can say, right, well, that happens there and this bit happens there. You can say, no, actually it happens this way. And you can move things around very easily and restructure things as you go. And that's great, obviously, when you're thinking about a future scenario as well, because you can try something out and think, oh, actually, no, that dependency here wouldn't work with that. So let's move things around and try it a different way without really any real cost. You're not committing to anything. You're just sort of mapping it out on paper prototyping an experience, if you like. And again, this is a great workshop method because different teams are usually responsible for different areas. And so conducting an activity like this, particularly if you're applying it to the as-is state, it's often a time when members of the same organisation for the first time are seeing and understanding the whole journey from a customer or your end user's perspective. Of course, it is completely possible to run a method like this, and we do in online remote workshops as well. It's obviously not 3D, but we can use tools like Miro to facilitate these kinds of things as well. Another technique that we use sometimes is scenarios. So with these, either we write them or we ask stakeholders in a workshop context to write about current and future customer journeys in a more narrative format that's based on research. So you can see here one that we wrote for a client project. It shows the key needs for a particular persona, importantly. It presents a brief narrative of what the ideal journey would look like for them. And then on the right-hand side, just there, you've got the site requirements. So what things does the website need to do or cover to fulfill that journey? So for example, here it talks about, for this ideal experience to happen, they need to see links to some case studies and testimonials with people with similar needs to them, and they need to get a bit of an idea of a rough price as well. So in the site requirements related to that, they need to be showcasing relevant case studies with indicative pricing. So it's a really useful way to kind of think through in a more narrative format what's the journey and what are the things that we need to action off of the back of that. So really quick, useful starting point for a design process. You can start to capture requirements in that way. Value proposition canvases. So once you've done your research, once you've identified what customers are trying to do, which in this case are called customer jobs. Once you've identified current pain points and gains, or in other words, things that are working well for customers, as that's seen on the right-hand side here in the circle, you can then use this value proposition canvas to generate new or improved products and service ideas, where you map out pain relievers. So these are things that are going to directly address some of the pain points that customers have with the current experience, or lack of a current experience. Gain creators, so things that are going to provide additional value, things that are going to work well and meet the needs of customers. And then in terms of the products and services area, those are things that are going to enable your customers to do the jobs that they need to do. I could do a whole talk just on value proposition canvases as a technique alone, because there's so much to it. It doesn't just cover, practical jobs, pains and gains. It talks about emotional, social things as well. So yeah, there's lots to it. But for today, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of some of the techniques. So let's bring all of this to life. I'm going to share now a snapshot of some of the different projects that we've done using some of these different mapping and modelling techniques. So to start off with, a national visitor attraction has over 1.5 million visitors a year. Our relationship with them has spanned several years, and we've been involved in all sorts of different projects over that time. But I'm just going to highlight a couple of them today. So one was a project where we were looking at iBeacons that they've got placed around the attraction, which give information about exhibits via your smartphone app when you've got your Bluetooth turned on and you get close to a particular iBeacon. So it will pop up on your phone with information about this tree, for example. And we researched the experiences of visitors to be able to give some evidence-based recommendations on how to improve that experience with this iBeacon service. And so we spent 2 days on the site performing contextual research through a mobile auto-ethnographic approach. So that is where researchers put themselves in the shoes of the visitor and they walk through the experience, gathering evidence as they go along. So right from the point of walking through the entrance, downloading the app, going through the attraction, exploring the grounds, exploring the different bits, looking at the things that pop up through the iBeacons and onto the phone. So we went on these journeys and we documented everything as we went. And that enabled us to produce a diary of touch points and experience maps, which showed all the highs and lows of that experience. And what you can see on the screen at the moment is an output of the experience map from the mobile tool that we used to collect the data during that experience. So you can see here, you can have sort of a note or a title for what was happening in that particular moment of the experience. You can rate it on a scale of emotion from positive to negative. It automatically captures a snapshot of the location at the time. And then also the participant can add any photos that they want to kind of highlight and illustrate the experience. And then what's really useful with this is that this map is obviously from the perspective of one participant, but what it enables you to do is to look at those and compare them across different participants and see if there's any consistency between the peaks and troughs of the experience between participants. And then we made actionable recommendations on the back of that. For example, things like adding instructions to users to make sure that their Bluetooth was turned on so that they actually saw the pop-ups coming up on their device, because some people had their Bluetooth switched off and hadn't realised. So in this case, it was about us as researchers documenting the experience. But we also use tools like this to help participants document the experience for themselves, which then means that we as researchers can kind of step back and we can see the output of these maps and then use them to prompt discussion in any sort of post-testing interviews. So they can be useful in that way as well. Another project that we did with this client was really interesting, looking at the digital estate that they had. So over the years, they've developed lots of different microsites to meet different needs. And they'd got to the point where they didn't really have a clear view of who their digital users were and how they were journeying across all the different parts of their digital estate. So they wanted to get a clearer understanding of that and produce a more unified, consistent digital experience for them. So we ran a workshop with stakeholders from lots of different departments with different responsibilities for the different sites. including their retail products area, their ticket purchase site, and others. And we explored with them some pen portraits and customer journeys. And what's always really fascinating in those kinds of sessions is just the awareness that they build and the empathy that they build between different teams about what's happening in other bits of the organisation and how the users are journeying through those different things. So to give you a little example, this is one of the sketch personas that came out of the workshop around somebody who's a plant labeller. So somebody who's responsible for labelling plants at botanical gardens, maybe like a National Trust property or something like that. And just wanting to make sure that they've got the right labels on the right plants. So we were thinking about what goals and triggers they had, but also the anxieties, the fears, the constraints that they would have as well as they were trying to achieve the tasks that they needed to do. And we were coming at this with a particular lens of thinking about the parts of the digital estate that these users would be interacting with and where maybe that would cause some confusion and how that could be helped. So we then got the stakeholders to think about the particular task that persona would try and do and then try and map out a user journey for that. So in this case, we used the swim lanes about process, thinking, so what kind of questions did they have at the time. We also looked at existing content and the existing sites that were matched to the needs that they had at each of those stages of the process, challenges that they faced and opportunities that they faced as well. So you could call this a very light touch content model. It is obviously possible to go into much more depth, as I've shown with content models, but at this stage we were really just identifying the main areas, the main sites that people would interact with to then set up a follow-up piece of work where they were looking at condensing the sites and giving more consistency across them, but also thinking about their strategy going forward for the future of the digital estate. So when somebody came with another request for another microsite or something that needed to be updated on one of the sites, they could examine that request in line with the strategy and make sure that it fitted into this holistic experience across their digital estate. The next case study is for a national charity that underwent some rebranding. They engaged us to understand how the individual services that they provide fitted within the overarching journey that users have with them as an organisation and what changes needed to be made to those services to help them fit together more effectively as part of their digital transformation strategy. So we conducted a series of senior stakeholder interviews, and really in those we were trying to gauge their understanding of how the services were working currently, understanding their thoughts about opportunities for change. And we then took all of that insight from the stakeholder interviews to build the structure of a stakeholder workshop. So it was a full day workshop. You can see here, all the teams came into a big space in their offices. We got people working in teams together, so teams where they were working with people they would be working with day to day, and then mixing up the teams so that they would get insights from across the different service areas. So we had people from their advice service, people from their retail products, their social change team, and their fundraising team as well. And we got them to think about creating pen portraits, creating empathy maps, and we also created as-is service blueprints for each of the individual service areas. But what was really interesting was when we started to explore how the end users transitioned between those different service areas over a lifetime. So, somebody who might be coming to this charity needing advice in the first instance might be somebody who went on to maybe be advocating for social change or looking to fundraise and looking at ways that they could run events to be able to help support that. So there was lots of different elements to it, and it was really interesting to see how that all mapped together. And we then, off the back of all of that, we ran another workshop with some stakeholders to help them to think about the business model canvas and how to communicate that digital transformation strategy that had been informed by all of this work to their senior stakeholders so that it would transition down the organisation. So this here was an example of a service blueprint that was created for the retail service products area. And what was really helpful here was getting them to think through every step of the journey, just to kind of pause and put down their individual responsibility for a specific area and think on a more zoomed out level to see it holistically. But not only that, it enabled them to articulate their experiences as staff trying to support the delivery of this service and articulating the challenges that they faced. So when we're thinking about service blueprinting, it's not just about creating better experiences for the end users, it's also about improving staff experiences too, which of course in turn has the knock-on effect of improving the end user experience as well. So it can be a really useful way of digging into some of those things. I'm not going to have time to talk you through the entire blueprint, but if we zoom in a little bit here, you can see some of the swim lanes that are used on this one. So we've got physical evidence at the top, which is all of the different pages of a website, an advert, a billboard that they might have seen or interacted with. You've got all of the customer actions. You've got the on-stage employee actions, so where they're directly speaking to somebody or interacting with somebody. Maybe it's a helpline, maybe it's a live chat, something like that. And then all of the off-stage employee actions, right at the bottom, all the support systems and the things going on behind the scenes, behind that curtain, if you like, that are supporting the delivery of the service that they're experiencing. And then you've got all these different arrows going between things, which highlight where there's interactions and where there's dependencies between these different things. So again, I could do a whole session just on service blueprints, but we will just have a very quick look at a little bit of an example. So this is just a slightly simplified, digitized version of a section of the one that I've just shown you. So what you can see here, we've got a customer who is searching online for a product, and in response to a Google ad, they then click through to Google Shopping to compare products and prices. Now, at this stage, they are not interacting directly with any of the charity's staff, but behind the scenes, there's all these other things going on where their sales team, their marketing team are maintaining their Google ads, and they're obviously interacting with the Google Ads platform to do that. And then at the point that the customer goes into the main web shop and starts exploring products and adding products to their basket, you've also, again, got the retail team behind the scenes that's maintaining that product catalogue, maintaining the pricing in there, and making sure that everything is as it should be. You've also got things like when they add something to their basket and they navigate away from the site, the support systems then trigger an email a period of time after that moment to kind of remind the customer, oh, you've still got this thing in your basket, here's an offer to be able to come back and purchase that. So walking through this can really help you to understand the complexities, dependencies, and some of the restrictions that are in place as well, which as a researcher is obviously really helpful because you're then aware of the kind of questions to ask and the areas that you need to dig into. But also when it comes to designing future services, it's really helpful for that because you can't design any solution in a vacuum, right? You need to understand the context that you're designing for, and you need to understand the organisation, how your proposed solution fits in to that organisation to make sure that it is actually, one, possible, and two, actually going to serve the end users and the customers and the staff in the best possible way. So that's why it's really useful, and that was a really fascinating project to be part of. Another example, an organisation reached out to us for support in understanding the public's political digital engagement. So they were looking to understand, what is it that people understand about politics? What do they want to know? How do they currently interact with politics in the UK? And how could we help that awareness and that engagement to be increased? So we worked on a major project with this organisation's digital team. We delivered a programme of work trying to understand the profile and needs of their website visitors, but also looking at how we could support that overarching objective of getting people to increase their engagement with democracy. So we recruited, we conducted qual and quant research, a mixture of that. We had over 1,000 people from across the UK, including people with diverse access needs as well. And we created personas as one of the outputs. You can see an example here that would help the organisation to then understand the needs of their users and to make changes in line with that overall objective. And as I said before, that was a really useful tool for the design team to then keep referring back to that as they made design decisions and base those on evidence rather than assumption. And if people came with a request, they could then look at it in terms of the research that they had and the understanding of the users that they had before they progressed that. Most recently, they engaged us again, and this time the focus was about gaining an understanding of people's attitudes when it came to digital, online political engagement. And the purpose of that piece was really to inform a business case for future technology development, but also identifying areas where public campaigns could be run to help encourage people into greater political engagement. So we did, again, a mixture of qual and quant research. And as part of that, we produced this map, which shows levels of engagement and identifies ways to sort of nudge people from being not engaged to somewhat engaged to very engaged across their lifetime. So a couple of examples of that we've got here in the not engaged group. One of the attitudes that people had in that group was, well, politics just doesn't affect my day-to-day life. So the opportunity there was to demonstrate it does and how it does, and to talk about the things that affect them at a really personal level and demonstrate that it does have an impact and how they can have a say on those things, how they can influence the decisions that affect them. And also highlighting the opportunity to reach out to them in digital spaces where they already are. So reaching out to them in spaces they are currently and using language that they understand that's going to sort of draw them in. In the somewhat engaged group, one of the sort of desires that we uncovered was that people who did engage with their MPs, for example, on things that they cared about, they didn't always understand, or they weren't always informed about what had happened as a result of that. So the opportunity that we highlighted there was that there could be follow-up. You know, we could demonstrate how their engagement was worthwhile. What happened because you spoke to us? Here's where this particular thing is up to. Here's what you could do next. And that would then encourage people to becoming more engaged because they would see that they'd had an impact. So if you look at the swim lanes on the left-hand side here, you can see that these were quite bespoke to this particular project. And as I said earlier, this is really the beauty of mapping, is that you can apply it in so many different ways. But this is also a great example of mapping that you don't just have to use it tactically when you're looking at, you know, a very sort of simple, as it were, journey online. It can also be used much more strategically when you're thinking about people's relationship with an organization as a whole, and how they move through that over time. So a bit more of a lifetime journey. Let's have a look at another case study. So the last one I'm going to share today is a piece around service design for visitors to historic attractions. So this organisation wanted to understand their visitors and the way that they were navigating around the physical space of one of their attractions in particular, using their digital visitor guide. So those little devices that you get when you go to a tourist attraction, and they give you some information about what you're seeing and how to get around. So we did lots of research around this. We did some contextual research, autoethnography, where we captured the researchers' own experiences. We did interviews with people on the spot and sort of grabbed people and talked to them about how they were using the current visitor guides. We also did observations of the space. We looked at mapping how people moved around the space, but also the highlights, the lowlights of those, including things like a lack of signposting in some key places, so physical signage, and the existing audio guide that didn't always provide kind of wayfinding support in the key moments where it was needed. And this I just wanted to show you as a bit of an example of business origami, because we used it in a little bit of a different way here, where we had a workshop to explore all of the research findings of the experience of the visitor journeys around this site. So we found out when we did this research that people were coming in and leaving the site through different entrances and exits, and they all had a different focus for their visit. They all took a different route around, but they didn't always necessarily interact with a paid experience. So we were looking at people who were cutting through. We were able to identify places where there was heavy footfall. And then we thought about ways that we could actually engage those people and maybe sell to some of them who were just passing through. So for example, if it's a jogger just kind of cutting through the grounds, we might be able to entice them to stop for a drink at the cafe, or give them some information about a current exhibition to inform them, maybe get their interest, maybe encourage them to actually come in and buy a ticket. But it also enabled us to understand where there were areas that were quite busy at times, and where it might be difficult to see signage because of the crowds, and how you might best position your signage to make sure that people could actually see where they needed to get to and move more effectively around that space. Off the back of all of that, we conducted a number of workshops with the team to analyse all of that, build on the existing personas, and we also looked at the digital user journeys on the website before people had even got to visiting the physical space as well, to look at the content, a whole content model around that, questions that people had, and all of the opportunities to improve it. And this is just an example of one of the experience maps that we created for that journey as well, from the point of arrival. Things like not knowing which door to go into. There was 2 doors. One was for a sort of a schools area, and one was the place that you purchased tickets. And we observed a number of people who kept going into the schools area and having to be sent back round to the place where they could actually buy a ticket. So that was really interesting. And then once they had created the digital visitor guide, we actually went back and tested that. So we did 4 rounds of lean usability testing in the site itself. So you can see me here interviewing a couple of people with a history tour going on behind me, which was fun. And we provided recommendations to improve the experience of that digital visitor guide, and did that in an iterative way. So that was the last case study I was going to show you today. A real variety of projects that I've tried to demonstrate how we can use these techniques not only in sort of digital tactical journeys, but also things that intersect physical and digital experiences, and also thinking more strategically, non-linear journeys, lifetime engagement with users as well. A couple of things just to mention before we get into some Q&A, and I'm hoping that there's been lots of questions being added as we've been going through. We could obviously share so much more on all of these different techniques, but if this has piqued your interest, we do have a range of training courses where we go into some of the things I've talked about today in much more depth. We've got a customer journey mapping and modelling course, but we've also talked today about research and how that's the foundation of everything we do. So our customer user research methods course is a great one, which goes into much more detail about that. We've also got, which should be popping up on your screens as I speak, a discount code for our courses, so you can get £50 off your next course for a limited time. So do take advantage of that. And we also offer a range of certified practitioner courses as well, which you can see here. Also, we offer bespoke courses. So clients will sometimes bring us in to train their teams in any one or a combination of those subjects that we run for our public courses. So if that's something you're interested in, do reach out to us. And we can also, you can hire us to come and speak at your events, at your team days. So if you can't maybe get everybody together for an entire day of training, we can come and speak instead. I mentioned at the start of today that we are offering an opportunity to have a free consultation with us. So if today's webinar has got you thinking about how could we put some of this into action, and you'd like to get some of our advice, either on work that you are currently doing or something you'd like to explore, we have got some time next Wednesday, the 4th of December. We've got a limited number of slots available on that day, but I will share a link shortly to a form that you can complete with your details and your availability after we've done some Q&A. And yeah, if you're lucky enough to secure one of those limited slots, we will be in touch to speak to you about that. But let's move on. In the few minutes that we've got left to do some Q&A, Ali, I hope, has been having a look at all of your interesting questions that have come in.
I have, and there have been lots of them. I've spotted a few themes.
Right.
There's a popularity battle being waged at the upvoting board. That's sort of similar but different. We'll start with one which is a familiar challenge to us, which is along the lines of how do you get people to engage with personas or any models, I guess, and a lot of work goes into them, and you all create these amazing personas or journey maps, and then they don't get adopted by the people in the organization. And what do you do in order to increase that engagement is sort of the theme of a couple of those questions. And a few things that I jotted down that I'm sure you can add to, Amy, is getting buy-in from stakeholders as soon as possible is really important. So we we'll always run a sort of stakeholder workshop to get those people in at the beginning, because they need to feel some ownership of the models of personas particularly. Make sure that they're not clashing with any existing models. We quite often find that there's multiple sets of segments, or they're called personas, but are they personas? And if people are already working with one set, then they're not going to abandon that and then pick up with another set. So what we do in that case is look at what's existing and build on what's there. So can we add a layer of digital behavior, for example, on top of some existing segments if there's already a set that's been really well adopted within the organization? Making those personas really visible in the organization is another thing, and there's all sorts of weird and wonderful ways that you can do that. So we've created artifacts like posters and mugs and things like that. We've had people do role play of the different personas. That's a really sort of funny and engaging way of getting people to really think about that person, you know, get a hat for different persona and get people to play the part. And doesn't everybody love role play? I hate it. So anyway, that's another thing. Give them real names as well. Don't call them my mind's gone blank, but really disappointed Debbie, or really disappointed, or something. Give them a name so that when you're in meetings you can refer to them and give them a seat at the table. If somebody says, oh, the users won't want that, then push that a little bit and say, which user? Here are our users, let's have a look at the personas we've got and see which ones will or won't like that. So those were some things that I came up with. I don't know, in those few minutes breathing space, if you've got any others, Amy.
I think you've covered most things. We have done it where people are willing to sort of dig into the details. We will provide, you know, a Miro board that has got more depth, and you can click into it and it highlights sort of little clips of interviews or maybe additional detail. So if you have got a really engaged audience, those can be really rich ways to deliver those resources as well. But yeah, I think you've covered most of the main ways that we would do it.
Okay, I know we're nearly out of time, but perhaps we'll just do this one, is when you're creating these models, they're often big and beautiful, and we're creating them in Miro or Figma or a really visual way, but we need to present them in a sort of PowerPoint, Google Slides type format. And how do we do that? Because the execs won't go into the detail of the Miro board. And I think in that case, it's exploring with, in our case, it would be our client, our main point of contact, understanding the needs of the stakeholders that are going to be there. Do they need the detail, or do they just need a sort of zoomed out view? It's having to live within a sort of PowerPoint template is really frustrating when there are so many other amazing tools available. But you saw most of these are on a slide because we've had to present them as slides. So it's, but I think if those stakeholders don't need the detail, what do they need? And is there a way that you can present that? Those links to videos is a really nice way, because it's very visual and engaging.
Yeah, I think in any playback, it's always about telling the story, isn't it? So making sure that you're telling a story that's going to meet the audience that you're presenting to. So as Ali said, finding out what is it that they're interested in, what are the key bits that you can draw out. So if you can't present it in its entirety, what are some key sort of examples that you could zoom in on and present sections of the map? If you don't have time to talk through every part of it, just really hone in on a few examples that illustrate why it's useful and key things that you've uncovered, and the key opportunities. Often it's the opportunities bit that people are most interested in, so being able to demonstrate why that's come up and what you're proposing.
Yeah, one more, because I thought this one was quite interesting. How do you how can you use personas if your product, service, website needs to be relevant to everyone? And this is a question that we're presented with a lot. And I think the key to that, which Amy talked through, is to make the personas needs based. You may have a really broad audience, but the chances are your website or your service is going to be addressing a much narrower set of needs of that broad audience. So by making the personas very focused on the needs, rather than starting with everyone, that will help make them more relevant and will lead really nicely on to the next step of a journey map that will help you identify those opportunities, was the thought I had there.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because people will come to us and say, but our audience is everybody. But there are, like I said before, there are behaviours that will span multiple people, but there's also behaviours that will, sort of segments that won't, and need to be a unique, distinct, focused thing. So focusing on the needs, focusing on what it is that people are actually trying to achieve is a really good way to think about that, rather than saying, well, this user type and this user type all have the same thing that they're trying to do. They will come at it with a different flavor. So capturing that and making sure that your personas are representative of that. There may be overlap, and sometimes we'll find that people have got too many personas, and actually we need to sort of condense them down, because they're trying to cover off everybody. But actually you can sometimes do that in a more effective way that actually makes them more memorable and more effective if it's a smaller suite of personas than too many that people can't remember them.
We also encourage people sometimes to elect a primary persona, even if you've got a set of 4 or 5 personas. Which one of these are your main ones? Which it might be the ones that you're selling most to at the moment, or it might be the ones that you're hoping to engage with most. And it doesn't mean that you're going to exclude the needs of all the other personas, but it means if you ever have conflict between your personas, then there's always one that you can say, well, this is our main one, and that might help, as long as you're really clear that, ideally we're meeting these needs, but if there's a conflict, then this is the route that we're going to go down, can sometimes help as well. Not always. Anyway, we're way over time. Apologies. I don't even know if there's anybody still there, but thank you, Amy. That was amazing. And thanks everybody for coming. I'll let you wrap up, Amy.
No worries. Thank you very much. We hope you really enjoyed that. I have posted in the chat the link if you want to request one of the free consultations with us next week. So you can have a look at that. I think Jo will also send it out on email after the session as well, if you've not spotted that in the chat. But yeah, if you want any advice on how to apply some of these things, get in touch and we will let you know. Slots are limited, so do get in there quick if you'd like to do that. But thank you very much again for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon and we will speak to you soon. Bye.